All right, welcome back to the channel. So looks like there's big news in the Yordenis Ugas, Manny Pacquiao versus Yordenis Ugas fight. Yordenis Ugas could have pulled a muscle in his arm or have a damaged bicep, which could affect the outcome of the fight. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So before I get into the meat of the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. Also share the video, like the video. It goes a great way towards helping the channel grow. Man, talk about bad luck if this is the case. And that being that Yordenis Ugas has a messed up bicep. I'm not going to call it a strained or a pull because I don't know. There's not been any doctor's reports. There's not been any conversation about him pulling out the fight. I saw the picture that was put up on several different channels, and it definitely looked like there was some swelling in his bicep. And I certainly hope that that's not the case. But if it is the case, that would change my prediction to the fight. Off the initial prediction for the fight is predicting Yordenis Ugas to win the fight, not because I can really see it in my mind's eye, but just because I think that this is a situation that is really ripe for an upset, where you have a guy like Yordenis Ugas who is a very, very hungry fighter, a very skilled fighter, a strong fighter, and somebody that would be a trouble for anybody to fight in the welterweight division, period, going against a guy that is who is a legend without a doubt. But Manny Pacquiao is a 42-year-old legend, and as a result, you're just waiting for the day. You're just waiting for the day, or eventually the day is going to come when he's just too old to even compete against guys that he used to beat, right? So, because for example, in Yordenis Ugas is this particular same situation. I've used this example before. There was a point in time in Muhammad Ali's career where he would have beaten Larry Holmes at the best that Larry Holmes was, and he beat him as a sparring partner, right? But then as time goes on, the young guy gets better and the older guy gets older, and at some point in time, that line of it's one guy coming down and the other guy going up crosses. So when the Yordenis Ugas, I look and say, okay, as Manny Pacquiao's coming down his ability ramp, and Yordenis Ugas is probably at the peak where he is, even if he never gets as high as where Manny Pacquiao was at a point. If he can stabilize and Manny Pacquiao continues to decline, he's going to decline past the point where he's going to be able to defeat Yordenis Ugas. So this particular situation in this fight is something that I say fits that. There's been other fights where I thought I could see that pattern too. Canelo Alvarez versus Gennady Golovkin was one. Gennady Golovkin was the younger fighter, and he was moving up Canelo Alvarez was the younger fighter. He was at 154. He had a bunch of good fights, competitive fights at 154. He moves to 160. Gennady Golovkin is the older fighter who's been established as a champion for a long time in that division, but Gennady Golovkin was coming down, Canelo Alvarez was coming up, and boom, they met pretty much right at the perfect time. But we're like maybe a year before, I think Gennady Golovkin would have won the fight. A year later, I think Canelo Alvarez, especially, and that's what happened in the second fight, Canelo Alvarez wins it even more convincingly. So those type of things happen. And so where people really have their eye on Manny Pacquiao because I've been listening to this for several weeks of people talk about, oh, the amazing speed, the amazing angles, all the amazing stuff that he can do. He's not doing that in a ring. He's doing that stuff in a practice ring. He's doing that in front of cones. He's running and throwing shadow boxing in front of crowds. That's not the same thing as doing that in a fight when you have somebody like Yordenis Ugas there that is really trying to get at you, right? So that's why I originally picked Yordenis Ugas to win this fight. And honestly, what I'm trying to do is get a dark horse win, and everybody be like, how smart Fanon is. But then, hey, I'll be the GOAT if it is not the way that you guys use the word GOAT. I'll be the GOAT if he loses, and I'll get a lot of abuse for that. But it is what it is. And at a certain point in time, that's going to happen to Manny Pacquiao. And it sounds like Manny Pacquiao wants to continue fighting. But if there is a torn bicep in this scenario, or a swollen bicep, then Yordenis Ugas is not going to be at a 100%. and then we'll see, whether or not that would be, whether or not, that really gives Manny Pacquiao an advantage. Now, my take on the scenario with the swollen bicep is that I think that that's just a picture, or it very well may be, a result of an injury that had happened in the past, and there's still swelling there. Because once you damage something, like I broke my hand one time. I broke my hand. There's a knot that's still on top of my hand, but that doesn't mean that my hand's still broken. It's just something that happened when, through healing. So in the case of Yordenis Ugas, he could have a swollen arm, slightly more swollen, but that could be the result of a previous injury that is completely healed and is okay. And this is the reason that I say that. If you call back to the fight with Deontay Wilder and Luis Ortiz, the first fight between Deontay Wilder and Luis Ortiz, there was the same conversation going on about Luis Ortiz and whether or not Luis Ortiz had broken his hand, because Luis Ortiz, if you look at his hand, he has this big lump on the top of his hand where clearly it looks like his hand had been broken, and either that was some callus or something like that. But people were out there taking that to mean that his hand was actually injured. But, he goes into the fight and it's not a big deal. It just wound up having been an old injury for him. So that's what I'm hoping, and that's what it looks like to me, because, I don't think that Yordenis Ugas would pull out of the fight, but I don't think that he's probably walking around with a torn bicep. And a couple reasons why that is because, how much bad luck can a fight possibly have? You know what I'm saying? Like, if you have 4 fighters that were involved involved in 2 fights, right? One guy, it was Yordenis Ugas, and the guy that he was going to fight is Manny Pacquiao, who was going to fight Errol Spence. Manny Pacquiao's opponent goes out because he has a torn retina, or has a torn retina. And there's something wrong with the eye of Yordenis Ugas' guy. And now for Yordenis Ugas to have a swollen bicep, it's just like, that would be way too crazy, and almost like the gods is trying to say, look, we want Manny Pacquiao to get his WBA super championship back, because the first fight resulted in him going back to fight for the original belt that was stripped from him by the WBA, and now to have the guy that's holding it being hampered, it just almost seems like too much. And also the way that the information was presented to me, it's not like it was he was, somebody at camp had seen him rip the arm, unless it's something that I missed in the coverage that I watched of it. But for me, it just seems to be something that is based off of his picture and whether or not his arm is actually hurt, and in an attempt really just to kind of have fun with the fight and talk about whatever it is that's associated with it. And that's what I'm doing here. This is actually really fun stuff. And that's one of the shames of why we really got to fix, a lot of the stuff that's going on in boxing, when the conversations around boxing are draw more interest than the actual fights themselves. Then there's a little something's wrong in boxing. But anyway, we'll see what happens to fight tonight. And no excuses on either side. If he gets into the ring with an arm that's hurt, that's on him. Hopefully there's nothing to the story, and he'll be 100% up and ready to go. But that's my take on the story. You let me know what you think. And with that, I'm out. Peace.